excited to do this. This is our first briefing for the challenge, and we're going to go on a road trip to other parts and regions of New Zealand. So maybe just to give a little bit of a background and intro, how we're doing the presentation today is like, we'll give some introduction of like why we're doing the challenge and why New Zealand for space. We'll give a little bit of background as well, like why Eric and I are here. And then we'll have a special speaker to talk about his experience in Antarctica as well. So, I'm Emily Dahlstrom, and Eric is like standing right there. We're part of the Edmund Hillary Fellowship Program. I don't know who, has anybody heard about Edmund Hillary here? So they're actually based here in this dojo. It's a new program that just like started this year. It's for entrepreneurs and investors from all around the world to come to New Zealand. You have a project that is that could scale and is very important to the New Zealand economy and industry. So that's what we did. We applied. There's about 300 people who applied, and we got in as like 28 of the fellows for the first cohort. So we're really, really excited. It's for 3 years, and we're here because of that. Just to give a little bit of a background on ourselves, my first passion is really space. I'm originally from the Philippines. I'm still American and Filipino, and so I grew up in the Philippines, like basically just on Star Wars and Star Trek. And for me, that's sort of like the career path that I really wanted to take, which is why it took me over this like 3 decades of either working for either an ecosystem that is working towards technology and space, to working for space startup companies as well in the US. Worked for Space Adventures and Odyssey Moon, which became Moon Express. And then as well, wrote a book a few years ago on how we think the future of spaceflight would be. Eric, you want to talk about yourself?
Yeah, okay. I started in physics and astronomy, radio astronomy, in the galaxy. Then I went into space engineering, worked on space station design for 8 years or so. Taught at International Space University. I met Emily here, worked together there, fell up there, and got married there. And so then recently in California, I worked on space startups.
So the other passion that I have really is impact. So as you can see, coming from a developing world, I had the opportunity of seeing sort of the 2 spectrums of the world, from being through in a place where there's really not much, to working in Silicon Valley where everything is really top-notch and you know, you're at the forefront of technology and so forth. So for me, my moonshot is really to democratize space. What does that really mean? For us today, there's still this gap of inequality that is happening in the world, and we think that the future, or the abundant future that we're actually going to have, is tied to how humanity is going to be a multiplanetary explorer species. And how do you get to that where everybody comes along? And so you actually need to make sure that everyone, not just the US and China and Russia, to be part of that space ecosystem and economy. So that is our moonshot. We want to make sure that the rest of the world actually gets that opportunity. So how do we do that? We created Space Base. So Space Base, we started here in New Zealand. We incorporated in New Zealand at the end of November. And it's really a social enterprise to, again, jumpstart an industry here in New Zealand that we hope could be a blueprint to scale to the rest of the world, so that we can actually also apply this in the different countries that need it. And so there's the 2 of us, and there's one other guy in California who's our blockchain guy, and he's actually sitting in the airport in Auckland right now working on the platform. But in any case, when we talk about creating this ecosystem, there's a roadmap that we think needs to happen, which means that you need to have the education and the jobs that will actually create those ideas and startups and potential businesses like in the future. So it's a holistic way of looking at it, and we want to support all of those levels. As a short-term kind of initiative and goal, we came up with like two things, so two projects. One is to create a New Zealand space directory. So the who's who in New Zealand, in terms of individuals or organizations. Now, most people would say, well, there's only one space company in New Zealand, it's Rocket Lab. Well, not really. The space industry doesn't just mean launchers and spacecraft. There's like everything in between. So we found out that with our research right now, there's about 70 organizations that have one way or another are actually involved in New Zealand on space activities. And I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg. So the other thing that we're working on is, how do you then, what's the easiest way of catalyzing a community? Well, incentive prizes is one of them. So which is why we're doing the New Zealand Space Challenge. So incentive prizes are not new. They've been around for a while. I mean, there's a lot of other challenges that actually different space agencies have done, or have done in the past, or are still doing. So the NASA Apps Challenge, we've judged as well in different countries. There's also the Act in Space, which is funded by the French Space Agency. And if you want to know more about that, there's a representative from CSST here who's also doing that for Tech Week. So there's a bunch of these that, for the price of one winner, you actually catalyze like ideas and projects and organizations. So getting more even more deeper, but why do a challenge in New Zealand? One of the things that I actually did also the past 10 years is that I worked for Singularity University. I was the Chief Impact Officer before I left. And essentially, exponential technologies have kind of like democratized or are democratizing access to space today. And not just space, but like kind of like every gamut of industry. For robotics, nanotech, biotech, like all of these are basically now between the last 5 or 10 years, which didn't used to be around, now it has actually opened up opportunities. And so like one case in point, that smartphone in your pocket essentially is a supercomputer because it's 120 million times much more powerful than all of the computers put together that was used during the Apollo era to send somebody to the moon. So just one, your smartphone. So it's like you see how technology has changed and technology has become cheaper. So again, because of that exponential change, there are now new markets that have happened that are now opening up in the space kind of like industry. So one example here, I just wanted to kind of like even make sure that you got the point that space is no longer for big governments and big aerospace companies, and they're no longer expensive. So Made in Space is one team. There actually are students back in Singularity University back in 2010, and their project is they started out with how can you make 3D printers work in zero gravity. So back in 2011, they started like testing 3D printers for zero-G flights. And then by 2014, they then now brought those 3D printers up to space stations. So there are now two 3D printers on the International Space Station that is created by these guys, which is just basically a startup company in the US. And then today, they are now commissioned by NASA to actually look at 3D printing big structures like in space. Now, why would you want to do that? Because today, the reason why launches are so expensive is because we always have to launch every single thing that we need up in space. But if you can actually 3D print them or manufacture them in space, then that becomes cheaper. So again, you see a lot of these things now happen. Actually, it feels like the industry is getting a lot more buzz happening in the last kind of like years, and with with SpaceX launching Tesla just recently. I mean, that's freaking awesome, actually. But in any case, you'll see all of these big missions from SpaceX to Amazon's Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, to even the coalitions of like Lockheed Martin and Boeing's to work on Moon and Mars kinds of missions. But again, these are still expensive. And so what you say, well, so how can New Zealand even be part of this? But if you look at kind of like the supply chain, here, this is what we're talking about, the big missions of SpaceX and going to the Moon and Mars. And then, Rocket Lab, New Zealand's a sweet spot. They actually found a niche market for small satellites to launch. But everything else, like all of these, is up for grabs. I mean, these are niche markets, from sensors to robotics to habitats to like how do you create food during those interstellar missions or interplanetary missions. Those are things that are analogs here on Earth that New Zealand has like some specializations. So you just need to kind of like port that technology. And the other thing as well is like all of these big aerospace companies, they're working on those big launchers, but there's nothing inside. They're focusing on the launcher itself, the technology of the launcher. But we want to make sure that anybody who actually goes to the Moon or Mars have all of these things that are needed for real long life support, either colonization missions to other planets. So this is just kind of an analog. These 3 women are actually in Antarctica today, where today we actually bring people to Antarctica on big C-17 planes. In the future, you're going to have Falcon Heavy also with the same analog of like bringing people and cargo to different planets. So my last thing is like, again, why New Zealand? There's a lot of elements for creating sustainable space industry. And New Zealand actually ticks a lot of the boxes for this. So one is that you have a progressive government that can actually move fast and create space policy and regulation to make businesses thrive. And then there's also, because of New Zealand's isolation, which is its benefit, there's a lot more launch angles to launch from, and then there's also a lot more frequency because there's no air traffic. If you're launching from the Cape, like in Florida, that's why it's not very frequent, because they always have to deal with those. There's also an existing education and tech and entrepreneurial community that is already in place that can be leveraged. And then, of course, with Rocket Lab, with the infrastructure and the facilities that are now in New Zealand, which puts it and bumps it up to being a spacefaring nation, which is like, you're now the 11th country in the world to launch orbital spacecraft. And the last thing is that the culture of New Zealand itself. I think New Zealand is really an exploration country, where with the Maoris and the Pacific people coming to New Zealand on their wakas, New Zealand also is definitely at the forefront of supporting like Antarctic exploration as well. And so the next step to that is essentially space exploration. So I'll give it to Eric to talk about.
This is part of my vision of the broad historical sweep of, from the Maori arrival in New Zealand and the Antarctic operations, launching to space. And, I need to work on the artwork, but anyway, this is the picture. And also we're trying to approach the Maori community to think about that. Certainly the Maori history is the greatest exploration and settlement on Earth back in 1,000 years ago. So, we're about to embark on another one coming up real soon. We need to take advantage of all the cultural heritage and messages studying what to pack on these interplanetary ships. So here's an aspect of the challenge that we through a discussion back in December with Christchurch NZ partners and other partners, we decided on focusing on Antarctica as an analog for future space activities, and that's so the challenge is focused on the difficulty of navigating in Antarctica, and later on Alan will tell us more about the conditions in Antarctica. I love this image because this is from the 1959 Trans-Antarctic expedition where UK and New Zealand joint effort, and this image was chosen to represent exploration challenges and was put on the Voyager record and is now going outside the solar system. So this is our symbol from Earth. So our fellow EHF fellow Daniel Price just recently conducted a traverse on the Ross Ice Shelf, and so he went through this part of Antarctica, and here you can see the going from the Scott base out to the target area out here, and it's a large distance. This is the North Island for scale. And here they are planning some of the traverse before the left, and this is the challenge that is motivated by these kinds of traverses. And so this is the specific language we've chosen. Using new or current technologies or data in space around the ice, find the best methods to identify hazards and map path across the ice, and/or design or prototype new sensor systems and algorithms to help vehicles navigate across the ice in Antarctica. And so there's a combination of different technologies that can apply to this. One is analyzing remote sensing data. There are other things, sensors on the vehicles on the ice, combined to address this navigation challenge for these traverses. If teams address these challenges, they can immediately apply them in extreme environment conditions, and within there are a lot of people in Antarctica and national programs around the world that are very interested in the results of this. But also there's future space applications that we're interested in on the Moon and Mars and other worlds. And there's also commercial applications back in more traditional applications of navigating across different terrain. And so some of the different aspects of this, for example, on part A, this is an example of what Dan was using to navigate. And so this was from synthetic aperture radar data at University of Otago, analyzing and having a manual process of identifying the crevasses, potential crevasses, using the SAR data. You can see that instead of going straight over here, there are all these crevasse fields necessitated weaving your way through here and even going 50 kilometers out of the way just in order to avoid the crevasses here. And so here is Dan monitoring the image like that on one screen, and also monitoring the ground penetrating radar data that you can see that reveals crevasses like this, and staring at the ground penetrating radar data here. And so these are, in some ways, it's sort of mind-numbing kind of activity for a human to be staring at these blank lines for 8 hours. And if you see if you don't see the little jagged line, you may fall to your death. So it's a terrible kind of combination of boredom and terror. So there are other people, and here's this example from Greenland, where they mapped a certain path and then had little rovers go out monitoring on the sides to try to map out the crevasses. Here's Dan's team. When they found a crevasse, they would poke it to see, try to measure the thickness of the ice bridge. If they had enough, if they could be confident driving across it. This was a NASA project with a rover out there. And the Holy Grail might be to actually conduct traverses robotically even into Arctic night, or Australian Antarctic night. They were able to fly a drone and be able to see ahead, but as you can see from the weather, they couldn't always fly a drone. And that's another example of some kind of systems that might be examined for this. So here's some of the categories for, we have specific criteria, judging criteria available, but in general categories, it's about using new technologies, technical feasibility, solutions, ease of implementation, and then there's things like team compositions, and with a preference for prototypes or some proof of the algorithm. We are collecting resources on our site and others. We have a set of YouTube channels and things like that. We have access to data and sample software for people who wants to try the remote sensing aspect of this. We're setting up training sessions here and around the country and videotaping. There are lots of good reports on the challenges and the details. And we have a beta version of our portal with discussion groups focused on the challenge. And so it's possible to go in to register your team of your area interest or individual interest and find and join teams and things like that.
So I'll just talk more about the mechanics of the challenge. So right now we basically kicked off the challenge last week in Christchurch, and the time frame is like 3 months. So again, maybe just to clarify as well, what are we looking for in terms of like applicants? The definition really is an entrepreneur, and the definition of the entrepreneur is as wide as it can be. I mean, it could be like a high school team or student who has this crazy idea that might work, to potentially on the other end, a company that already has a potential solution for this, but they're using it in a different industry. So it's really wide. And so all of the applications basically are submitted online. There's a portal that we're using, a platform called Slack group. And it's be open until 30th of April, where then it closes. And the challenge is like two-tiered. So essentially, the applicants apply into their own regions. There's like 5 regions that we've identified. And there will be regional judges as well who will evaluate those applications. And at the end, on the 16th of May, each region will basically pick a finalist, of which that finalist will come to Christchurch in May 24th for Tech Week to actually do their final pitch. And then we have another set of panel judges that will then award the winner. The application requirements, this is just like a summary. Essentially, the 2 biggest things here is like it's a pitch presentation of what you think your solution is, no more than like 20 slides, and a short video of what you think you're going to be doing. If you have a prototype already, just like a 5-minute video. The prize. So, as Eric mentioned earlier, for the applicants, what we're trying to do here is like we're building a community. So, the space-based portal, which is in beta right now, and quite honestly, it's buggy at the moment, but we're like working on it. It then opens up for a community to actually start essentially either potentially working together and finding people, There's also mentoring and technical support that are coming from our sponsors. So GQ Law, who's here, is one of our gold sponsors. They will be basically helping with services during the actual time of the challenge. And then when we get the finalists as well, the finalists, all of them, like the 5 finalists, will have at least like 3 to 6 months of incubation time in region. So we're also partnering with different potential co-working spaces and accelerators so that those finalists can actually work on their projects and take it forward, like even after the challenge itself. And then one representative is also going to be given the travel expense to come to Christchurch and do the pitch. And then for the grand prize winner, it's $15,000 in cash. So how can you be involved? Again, there's a lot of information out there. It might not be sometimes intuitive. On the NewZealandSpaceChallenge.com website, there is an FAQ sort of like section in there. So a lot of those questions that normally people ask, we've already pre-made the answers. There's a resources list on Space Portal. So be sure to kind of go into the New Zealand Space Challenge kind of like team or org. And then we're going to be putting up links and training videos on there as we go during the next kind of like 3 weeks time period in February. The application, as I mentioned, is going to be on the portal. And if you have any questions, applications@NewZealandSpaceChallenge.com. And again, join the community with the portal and share to anybody that you think would be interested in applying for the challenge. So before I turn it over to our next speaker to talk about his actual experience and making the problem more probable, because it really is important. Do anybody have any questions on this particular part of the presentation? Yeah.
I might not have heard, but you know the bit at the very end with the Caravan Innovation Support and 15,000. Is that the prototype in Antarctica or in space?
So,
like what happened after?
Yeah. So again, the challenge in itself is geared towards solving a particular problem for Antarctica. Okay. But at the same time, again, like all of these can be ported to anything. Like all of the technology, even from the data analysis to the sensors part to potential robotics involvement, can be used either like in any extreme environment. So during disaster areas or disaster incidences, that's kind of like one example. For space, this is basically the first step. So if you have that technology, it ports very much to all of the other space missions that could happen in the future. And so if you have, if you have that potential product or service now, those missions in the future will be able to kind of like leverage that technology to actually happen.
Yeah, we're still working on. We don't have any role for people to go to Antarctica with their system, but I think that's something that we work on, especially in May as you work on getting ready for the next season. I think that's something we can, but we can't make any promises at this point.
Any other questions? Okay. So I have the honor of introducing Alan Gray, who actually has like just tons of experience in Antarctica, and I won't say much because I know he's going to talk more about himself. So please welcome Alan.
Hi guys.